Yeah, the synopsis of this is basically early believers of the Baha'i religion. Of course, starts the history of the socioeconomics and ecclesiastical structure in Iran during the Qajar dynasty, as well as the movement in Islamic doctrine in terms of a challenge to traditional Shia 12ers came in by Sheikh Ahmad Asai, which created a Sheikhi branch, which departed from traditional Shia 12ers from the point that majority of the allusions to the Quran and Hadith is really allusions and not actually material. So those everything concentrates on the end of time, or the time of resurrection, which is promised in prior revelations, including Islam. In Islamic culture or prophecy, they're looking for two kinds. One is return of the 12th Imam, which disappeared in 260 in Islamic calendar, and return of Imam Hussein, which is basically in the Quran refers to return of Messiah or return of Jesus. So Sunnis believe in return of Jesus and Mahdi, which is the two kinds. Shiites believe in return of 12th Imam, and they call it Mahdi as well, and return of Imam Hussein. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq basically made this reference to return of Imam Hussein and he found this in Quran, which has the reference. So this is what Shias differ as far as with Sunnis as far as return, the two returns. Generally. But the key element was that based on calculation and prophecies in Quranic and Hadith, which is the basically unofficial practices of the time of Muhammad, they came up with these basically references that the time of resurrection is imminent. So this is Sheikh Ahmad, which was in Sheikh movement. He was one of the scholars, but he was a Shiite, the 12er also. So, but this was a major differentiation between Sheikhs regarding this subject, which was quite create a stir in the environment that they were in, but because he was a very scholar at the time that he was alive, people couldn't refute his arguments generally. After him, Sayyid Kazim al-Ashti, which was his disciple, said that the coming of the 12th Imam is imminent to Mahdi. So he sent his disciples out to go and search for the 12th Imam. During that process, of course, at one sitting he referred to Bab that was in the gathering as well, that the light of God has shone forth in this room. So there are references that in the book that we read, that he actually knew who the Bab was, but he wasn't divulging his identity because of obviously it was a great danger to his life. And later on, Bob mentioned that he needed 19 people or 18 people, himself 19 people, to independently find him. So this disciple of Sayyid Kazan al-Ashti, Sheikh, is scattered all over trying to find this 12th Imam. And in Shiraz, basically, Mullah Hussein was the first one that believed in him. And he found by himself. And subsequently, 17 others joined the faith through their own will. And now it's, he basically, we left a story where he's planning to go to Mecca based on hadith that whoever comes in will go out and announce his presence to Mufti of Mecca, which is announcement of the 12th Imam. So he's planning to go and do that. And he left Mullah Hussein. And now with the story where all of his disciples are going to centers of learning, which was Mashhad, I think Isfahan, Mashhad, Shiraz, and certain other areas, mostly to these madrasas, which were basically scholarly schools, school of thought. And initially, obviously, they were addressing the sheikhs, but even within their ranks, because most of the people that believed in Babi initially were basically scholars themselves, and they had to, one of the major aspects about this movement was Bob was telling them that you have to disassociate yourself from material things. So detachment was the cause to their titles, to their followers, to their assets, to their even family. And he prophesied to them that they're going to be going through hardship and lose their lives, basically. So this is really where the story is, and many of them actually, even in the Shafi movement, that their philosophy was this coming of 12th Imam. They saw by admitting to that they would lose all their prestige and material assets, and of course they would be singled out as an infidel or non-Muslim because they wouldn't believe in Islam anymore. So it's a story of really struggle within those people that even were Shaykhis, that were believed in the doctrine of Shaykh Ahmad, that they couldn't make this transition to the new religion because of the consequences that they had to accept, starting from scratch basically and losing everything they had.
Mirza Muhammad Baqir-e-Qaini, who for the remaining years of his life had established his residence in Mashhad, was the next to embrace the message. The love of the Bab inflamed his soul with such a consuming passion that no one could resist its force or could belittle its influence. His fearlessness, his unsparing energy, his unswerving loyalty, and the integrity of his life all combined to make him the terror of his enemies and a source of inspiration to his friends. He placed his home at the disposal of Mullah Hussein, arranged for separate interviews between him and the ulamas of Mashhad, and continued to endeavor to the utmost of his power to remove every obstacle that might impede the progress of the faith. He was untiring in his efforts, undeviating in his purpose, and inexhaustible in his energy. He continued to labor indefatigably for his beloved cause until the last hour of his life, when he fell a martyr at the fort of Sheikh Tabasi. In his last days, he was bidden by Qudus, after the tragic death of Mullah Hussein, to assume the leadership of the heroic defenders of that fort. He acquitted himself gloriously of his task. His home, situated in Bala Qiyaban, in the city of Mashhad, is up to the present time known by the name Bab'i. Whoever enters it can never escape the accusation of being a Babi. May his soul rest in peace. Mullah Hussein, as soon as he had won to the cause such able and devoted supporters, decided to address a written report concerning his activities to the Bab. In his communication, he referred at length to his sojourn in Isfahan and Kashan, described the account of his experience with Baha'u'llah, referred to the departure of the latter for Mazindaran, related the events of Nur, and informed him of the success which had attended his own efforts in Khurasan. In it he enclosed a list of the names of those who had responded to his call, and of whose steadfastness and sincerity he was assured. He sent his letter by way of Yazd to the trustworthy partners of the Bab's maternal uncle, who were at that time residing in Tabas. That letter reached the Bab on the night preceding the 27th day of Ramadan, a night held in great reverence by all the sects of Islam, and regarded by many as rivaling in sacredness the Laylatul Qadr itself, the night which, in the words of the Quran, excelleth 1,000 months. The footnotes here say that Ramadan, corresponding with the night preceding the 10th of October, AD 1844, and the Laylatul Qadr, meaning literally the night of power, is one of the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and, as is commonly believed, the 7th of those nights reckoning backward. The only companion of the Bab, when that letter reached him that night, was Qudus, with whom he shared a number of its passages. I have heard Mirza Ahmad relate the following. The Bab's maternal uncle himself described to me the circumstances attending the receipt of Mullah Hussein's letter by the Bab. That night I saw such evidence of joy and gladness on the faces of the Bab and of Qudus as I am unable to describe. I often heard the Bab in those days exultingly repeat the words, "How marvelous, how exceedingly marvelous is that which has occurred between the months of Jamadi and Rajab." As he was reading the communication addressed to him by Mullah Hussein, he turned to Qudus and, showing him certain passages of that letter, explained the reason for his joyous expressions of surprise. I, for my part, remained completely unaware of the nature of that explanation. Mirza Ahmad, upon whom the account of this incident had produced a profound impression, was determined to fathom its mystery. Not until I met Mullah Hussein in Shiraz, he told me, was I able to satisfy my curiosity. When I repeated to him the account described to me by the Bab's uncle, he smiled and said how well he remembered that between the months of Jamadi and Rajab he chanced to be in Tehran. He gave no further explanation, and contented himself with this brief remark. But this was sufficient, however, to convince me that in that city of Tehran there lay hidden a mystery which, when revealed to the world, would bring unspeakable joy to the hearts of both the Bab and Qudus. The reference in Mullah Hussein's letter to Baha'u'llah's immediate response to the divine message, to the vigorous campaign which he had boldly initiated in Nur, and to the marvelous success which had attended his efforts, cheered and gladdened the Bab, and reinforced his confidence in the ultimate victory of his cause. He felt assured that if now he were to fall suddenly a victim to the tyranny of his foes and depart from this world, the cause which he had revealed would live, would, under the direction of Baha'u'llah, continue to develop and flourish, and would yield eventually its choicest fruit. The master hand of Baha'u'llah would steer its course, and the pervading influence of his love would establish it in the hearts of men. Such a conviction fortified his spirit and filled him with hope. From that moment, his fears of the imminence of peril or danger entirely forsook him. Phoenix-like, he welcomed with joy the fire of adversity, and glorified in the glow and heat of its flame.
So, the last paragraph, actually last chapter, even last week, was basically travels of Baha'u'llah in his native land of Mazandaran, especially the city of Nur, which he was born actually at. And because he was son of a prominent vizier or minister, people would gather and try to ask him regarding the affairs of the state and so on and so forth. So he had a platform to really announce the new revelation to them. And basically religious leader at the time of there was trying to basically not interact with him. And at one sitting, even before that, his Baha'u'llah's uncle actually was against Baha'u'llah, was trying to instigate this Mullah, the religious leader, to put an end to his message generally. And of course, he was avoiding him because he had no answer for what he was presenting. And one sitting, even he mentioned that he's going to consult Quran in terms of whatever page he opened up the book with the answer whether this new message is valid or not. And the minute he read the page, he closed it and left the gathering. So he was convinced that he had no answer.
Gilbert, what is unclear to me is now Baha'u'llah and Bab are both living here. Right. Where does Baha'u'llah come into picture? How did they know this was the individual and how?
Well, this is the whole point. First of all, Baha'u'llah and Bab never met each other.
But were they in communication at all?
I'm not sure. So far, they haven't. This is really Mullah Hussein writing a letter. We read later on. Mullah Hussein basically wrote a letter to Bab regarding events that occurred during his travels. And last segment that we read was this basically successes that Baha'u'llah had propagating the Babi message during the northwestern Iran. And because obviously his father was quite higher up in the government, and through his influence, people would come to him, and obviously he was well known of his generosity and helping the poor. So most of the people knew him in that area. So he was a prominent person. And when he brought the new message, obviously people adopted what he was bringing in because he could answer their questions. And it's interesting, the story where the chief clergy of Nur sent two of his son-in-laws, which were his students, best students, go to examine Baha'u'llah and at one of his talks. And they traveled to that city, and ironically, neither of them came back, and they joined the Babi movement. So this was, and he mentioned that if my disciples, which are the most learned of my students, would accept this, then I would say it's okay. But apparently, so the whole process was that the whole movement, Babi movement, basically caught fire from the Nur and through Baha'u'llah. And remember, everywhere else, like Mashhad, both sheikhis and non-sheikhis, they had to, that infrastructure that existed, they couldn't really penetrate. There was only one or two people that became Babis, and one of them, which was, I think, Qaini, that basically he allowed Mullah Hussein to use his house and so on and so forth.
At this stage, can we say Baha'u'llah had joined Bab's movement?
Yes, that's obviously.
He's a follower.
Right.
So he first becomes a Babi.
Of course.
Yes.
Of
At
course.
this point in the history, like with the book, are they referring to him as Baha'u'llah for our benefit? Because he hadn't declared himself yet. So at this point, to the other Bab'is, he would just be Mirza Hussein,
That's
a very well-learned Babi.
But remember, these events, like this refers to, for example, the Battle of Sheikh Tabarsi was a small, basically, fort, which had very small, which really Babi movement stood their grounds, and the government attacked them, and they were defending their belief in that Sheikh Tabarsi, which apparently Mullah Hussein lost his life there, and I believe.
This is something that is talking a lot about Mullah Hussein's mortality. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, Mullah Hussein is Babu, but remember, right?
He's here.
Right. The key is these are events that occurs in the future. He's referencing here. The Sheikh Tabarsi occurred afterward. Now remember, the Baha'u'llah became Babi after these letters of the living, those 18 souls, spread and tried to spread the Babi religion. So everywhere they went. And ironically, because they were from different provinces of Iran, Sheikh Sayyid Kazim actually told them to go disperse. And I mean, after Bab sent them to their own provinces to really, because they knew people there, to really propagate the message. And this is really the success that they had was apparently the first major success was in Nur and through Baha'u'llah. So that's the second generation of Baha'is that were taught by the basically letters of the living. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a
little
little
bit. Learned about Bab'S, who conveyed this message from Bab.
Well, there was a reference.
Mullah Hussein.
Right.
Directly Mullah Hussein.
Right.
Mullah Hussein came and taught him the faith.
Yeah.
But in Tehran,
Yeah.
it was in Tehran.
He was in Tehran.
So it's a very interesting, it's a little bit confusing from a timeline point of view. But this is really, Baha'u'llahs are second generation Baha'is after the letters of the living that spread the message. So this was the whole process where Bab mentioned that now he can be rest assured that his message, the message of God, will not terminate. Because again, as we saw, the government later on obviously tried to decimate the whole Babi movement. And hundreds of thousands of people became Babis at the time because they were looking for them. And of course, the Shaykhi movement, majority of Shaykhis became Babis.
And majority of those people were scholars and high-ranking people.
Oh, of course, it was a completely new movement, and mostly this was in the ecclesiastical structure itself. That it's like during the Christianity, when, for example, they discovered that Earth is round and is not flat. Galileo, with the Muslim binoculars, found out that the mast of the ships are coming first, then the ship appears, so they must be quite round, and it's not flat based on the belief. And what did they do? They put them in jail. So these new movements, scientific movement, and of course later on Luther came in and created this basically Protestant movement, which was really, you're saying, read the Bible. Why don't you read the Bible? So this is really very similar thing that was happening, where the scientific side and the practical side of those scholars that were deeply understood
the Quranic prophecies were moved already toward the Shaykhi movement regarding this breakage from the old tradition of the literal end of time or day of resurrection. So this was a far more departure from the traditional, even differentiation between Sunnis and Shiites. It's not as deep as this fractionation that occurred with Shaykhi movement. It was a complete departure from those basically superstition and human translation that occurred. So that's why nobody could refute his argument because it made sense. So there's similar condition was occurring when you're looking at Shaykhis. Most of the Shaykhis were actually reformed Shia Twelvers, but they were Shiites regardless at the time. So when Babi movement came in, obviously they were more prepared to accept it for this new manifestation. And remember, this twin manifestation was woven in the Islamic culture, that actually there are hadiths which they come in 9, 17 or 19 years apart. There are different references in hadith related to when these twin manifestations were coming in. So they knew that when Bab'i is coming, Baha'u'llah is going to be right behind him. And interesting, the hadith itself, that these are, of course, from also writing of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq related to the basically conquering of the world. And again, Sheikh Ahmad was describing this is a spiritual conquering, not physical. So there were a lot of these things that were described by Sheikh Ahmad. And of course, during past 100 years or 150 years, the Shiites tried to erase this history. So they were teaching Muslims stuff which had nothing to do with Hadith or Quran. And the Shia Twelvers today, majority of them don't know about these things at all, which is written in their own book, generally. So the reference to this ecclesiastical structure is to know the same type of reform that occurred in Christianity was occurring. And most of the scholars were moving toward basically Protestant movement because it allowed masses to really get involved and understand. And it was interesting, actually, during those periods, the Catholics were forbidding people to read the Bible because they were doing completely against stuff that was in Bible. They didn't want anybody to read it. So that's why the Protestant movement occurred. Well, similarly, these guys were doing the same thing. They were just bringing the books and teaching the people, not learning it through the mullahs, which they had vested interest to keep them basically in ignorance. So they were propagating this. And so to your answer related to most of the people that migrated toward Babi religion was those reform, quote unquote, Shia Twelvers, basically, that were scholars basically in their own. But the price they had to pay was huge because they had to leave the prior religion now. Still during Shaykhi movement, right? Shaykhi movement, they were under the protection of, they were Muslim actually. So we're saying, okay, these are reformed Shia Twelvers. So the whole story really relates into detachment, how detached one person can be. And this shows the level of detachment that they had to go through. They had to leave their religion, they had to leave their friends, they had to leave their disciples, they had to leave their material possessions, and they had to leave their own family to really be able to push this religion generally.
That's a lot to ask.
Yes.
Well, guys, that's the day of resurrection. You know, in Quran it says that they judge people of whether you're faced with the truth, you accept the truth, or you basically, and this is the hell and heaven that they're talking about, that people get judged based on what the truth is and whether they're willing to accept it at any cost.
This is why we're reading a book about them, and they're not reading a book about us.
That's right.
They're different kinds of
Like
people.
hundreds of thousands of people became Babis?
Oh yeah, it was huge, right?
That's why
Before
the
they,
Mullahs are doing
right.
their best now.
Oh yeah, now
because they know
I'm
what will
wondering that
happen.
what happened to all this, hundreds of thousands?
No, I'm saying that the
Yeah.
mullahs are fighting it now because
Yeah.
they know that.
Oh yeah,
they
now I
belong
know.
But
to-
remember, they
Those days-
decimated
those days, the
most-
Babis, not the
right.
But they
Baha'is,
kill
yeah.
Baha'is now
Yeah.
so that the Muslims get so afraid that they don't convert to Baha'i faith. Otherwise, we know a lot of
Yeah.
people
Right,
want
it's-
to become Baha'i.
yeah,
Yeah.
they-
But they're afraid of their
Of course,
life, so
yeah.
they don't.
okay.
Chapter 7, the Bab's pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. The letter of Mullah Hussein decided the Bab to undertake his contemplated pilgrimage to Hijaz, entrusting his wife to his mother and committing them both to the care and protection of his maternal uncle. He joined the company of the pilgrims of Fars who were preparing to leave Shiraz for Mecca and Medina. A footnote says, according to Haji Mu'inuz Sultani's narrative, page 72, the Bab set out on his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina in October AD 1844. Qudus was his only companion, and the Ethiopian servant his personal attendant. He first proceeded to Bushir, the seat of his uncle's business, where in former days he, in close association with him, had lived the life of a humble merchant. Having there completed the preliminary arrangements for his long and arduous voyage, he embarked on a sailing vessel, which, after 2 months of slow, stormy, and unsteady sailing, landed him upon the shores of that sacred land. High seas and the complete absence of comfort could neither interfere with the regularity of his devotions nor perturb the peacefulness of his meditations and prayers. Oblivious of the storm that raged about him, and undeterred by the sickness which had seized his fellow pilgrims, he continued to occupy his time in dictating to Qudus such prayers and epistles as he felt inspired to reveal. I have heard Haji Abul Hassan Shirazi, who was travelling in the same vessel as the Bab, describe the circumstances of that memorable voyage. During the entire period of approximately 2 months, he asserted, from the day we embarked at Bushir to the day when we landed at Jadi, the port of Hijaz, whenever by day or night I chanced to meet either the Bab or Qudus, I invariably found them together, both absorbed in their work. The Bab seemed to be dictating, and Qudus was busily engaged in taking down whatever fell from his lips. Even at a time when panic seemed to have seized the passengers of the storm-tossed vessel, they would be seen pursuing their labors with unperturbed confidence and calm. Neither the violence of the elements, nor the tumult of the people around them could either ruffle the serenity of their countenance or turn them from their purpose. The Bab himself, in the Persian Bayan, refers to the hardships of that voyage. But first there is a footnote. It is thus that I myself saw, on the voyage to Mecca, a notable who was spending considerable sums of money, but who hesitated to spend the price of a glass of water for his fellow traveller. This happened on the boat, where the water was scarce, so scarce, in fact, during the voyage from Bushir to Muscat, which lasted 12 days with no opportunity to get water, that I had to content myself with sweet lemons. From the Persian Bayan, Volume 2, page 154. One cannot imagine on the sea anything but discomfort. One cannot have all the necessities, as in land travel. The mariners are obliged to live thus, but by their services they come nearer to God, and God rewards actions performed on the land and on the sea, but he grants a twofold recompense for those services accomplished by one of the servants on the sea, because their work is more arduous. Ibid, pages 155 to 6. I have seen, on the way to Mecca, acts of the vilest kinds in the eyes of God, which were sufficient to undo the good resulting from the pilgrimage. These were the quarrels among the pilgrims. Verily, the house of God has no need of such people. The Bab himself, in the Persian Bayan, refers to the hardships of that voyage. For days, he wrote, we suffered from the scarcity of water. I had to content myself with the juice of the sweet lemon. Because of this experience, he supplicated the Almighty to grant that the means of ocean travel might soon be speedily improved, that its hardships might be reduced and its perils be entirely eliminated. Within a short space of time, since that prayer was offered, the evidences of a remarkable improvement in all forms of maritime transport have greatly multiplied, and the Persian Gulf, which in those days hardly possessed a single steam-driven vessel, now boasts a fleet of ocean liners that can, within the range of a few days and in the utmost comfort, carry the people of Fars on their annual pilgrimage to Hijaz. The people of the West, among whom the first evidences of this great industrial revolution have appeared, are, alas, as yet wholly unaware of the source whence this mighty stream, this great motive power, proceeds, a force that has revolutionized every aspect of their material life. Their own history testifies to the fact that in the year which witnessed the dawn of this glorious revelation, there suddenly appeared evidences of an industrial and economic revolution that the people themselves declare to have been unprecedented in the history of mankind. In their concern for the details of the working and adjustments of this newly conceived machinery, they have gradually lost sight of the source and object of this tremendous power which the Almighty has committed to their charge. They seem to have sorely misused this power and misunderstood its function. Designed to confer upon the people of the West the blessings of peace and happiness, it has been utilized by them to promote the interests of destruction and war.
Okay, let's wait and you can continue. This concept here is very unique in terms of Baha'i doctrine related to what actually propels civilization. See, the question is that is it the improvement in civilization relates to the discovery of technology, or as we learned before, the infusion of the spiritual forces outside the dimensions that we exist today, from a spiritual realm, causes this propelling of civilization itself. And on the physics law that we discussed regarding entropy, obviously we know every system, closed system in the world, eventually it exhausts its resources and dies. Nothing is exception to this law. It's a thermodynamics law. The only time a machinery propels forever when there is an infusion of energy outside the system that propels something to go forward forever or increase. If you look at the sun, eventually sun exhausts the internal energy it has and it dies. So does basically all the planets around it would die as well. Even religion itself falls into the same category, because religion is an organic matter where obviously it reaches its course, it goes into zenith, and then it dies. And we've seen this. But civilization doesn't die. So the reason civilization doesn't die is because this infusion of the spiritual realm into the physical reality, which propels the civilization to go forward. So this is really the clear indication that not only these messengers of God has implication in the spiritual growth and new laws that are coming in, but it's preparing humanity to be able to absorb and harness the technologies that would be discovered after their coming. So when you look at the And Abdul Baha referenced this very clearly into the Islamic movement that say bunch of nomads, uneducated, basically savage people created the golden age of basically Islamic culture. How did this happen? They discovered sciences that never was discovered before. So this jump in the material sciences was caused because they released this energy into the realm of physical reality. So the Baha'is believe that this process will occur indefinitely. Yes?
We know that industrial revolution and discoveries happened after 1844.
Well, that's the point.
The history of it is there.
Right.
All the discoveries.
Well, the question is, obviously we believe that the link of this growth in industrialization was this energy of freeing the minds of people and infusing this energy into people so they could discover, actually. But the whole point is that this benevolence, it shows the benevolence of God, where it actually gives us the instruction set before we get there. So all the blueprint of how societies should operate, both from spiritual and material intercommunication, before those communities would get created. So the blueprint would come first, and of course, is the will of free will of humanity that accepts or rejects it. Rejection of it has dire consequences. They would use those tools of sciences to war, disunity, basically, and we saw the signs of it. And interestingly, when Abdul Baha was traveling in 1911 to Western, and 1912 in Western land, he actually was prophesizing that if you do not accept these, you're going to get engulfed in wars. Even warned in a church, in actually synagogue in California, that look, Europe would raise against you because you didn't accept the message of Jesus, for example. Not that they're bad people or good people. They're the blueprint of the society, which is in Christian term is called Holy Spirit. There are consequences, both individually and societal, consequences of violating the law. Now, every one of us know that Newtonian law is laws of gravity, right? If you jump up from the 5th floor of a building, what's going to happen? You know, everybody knows you're going to come down. You're not going to go up, right? So the question is, what is that? So that's an axiom. It's a law. So the blueprint of societies are axioms and laws the same way. If you violate, and if you say, I am distinct, and this was happening with many different groups, that if I'm different from the other person, what is happening? You're discriminating, you're violating an axiom of a law. And there are consequences, and the consequence was that wars occurred, and people that segregated themselves, not by choice, but by culture, by old beliefs, by superstition, were isolated and were easily attacked. So the key really relates to Holy Spirit or doctrines and axioms that there are consequences, both individually and societal. And all of it was prophesied. So the question right now is, dynamite, for example, that was created for basically mining, and they used it for something else. So these are the key elements. Nobel, for example, Nobel Prize that you're seeing is this inventor of this. So the question really is the use of the sciences, the blueprint of use of the sciences comes first, and then the discoveries occur, and it's up to us whether we want to apply those axioms, laws to it or not, and we see the consequences.
My understanding of this paragraph, bracket is that elements of nature can be manipulated, perhaps by certain requests from certain people. Is that correct?
No. This goes to the concept of the scientist. Okay, a scientist gets what? How do they discover a formula? They work decades, right? And then suddenly they get an inspiration and a formula and an axiom comes to them, right? Marie Curie found radioactivity, right? So eventually, and she died from it too. But it took decades and decades to find one item, right? So what happens is that this process of inspiration is very similar. Abdul Baha mentions to the inspirations or basically those, in Farsi they call it wahy, that comes to the manifestations of God is fairly similar. So what ends up happening is that now imagine that you have Einstein, which did maybe two items in his entire career, right? Now these guys are revealing the Holy Spirit, which every page of it is one formula. So you compare the diffusion of the spiritual energy by these blueprints of the society, which is the Holy Spirit, that in Christian terms. Every word, every sentence is a new discovery. For example, you're talking about there is no infidel. Imagine, why did this infidel existed prior to revelation of Bab or Baha'u'llah? Because they needed to create distinction to bring people from their dark ages of practicing non-monotheistic type of religions to become believer of God. But at that time, that particular distinction disappeared. Baha'u'llah says, nothing is unclean, and there is no infidel. So these are major aspects. So when you're looking at Aqdas, or for example, even Bab's, Bayan, for example, there are thousands and thousands of these laws that are coming, which individual human being, those scientists that discovered steam engine, they worked decades to come up with one. You see? So the process itself, of course, from an inspiration point of view, is very similar. But the scope and breadth of it is completely different. So it causes that energy. A simple source of for example, Babi and Baha'i movement was emancipation of women. Suddenly, half of the population of Earth could become scientists, which they could never even study. They couldn't go to school. Now suddenly, half of the population. Why? Because it's a blueprint, it's an axiom. You violate it. Guess what? We can actually go into humanity today, examine societies, and see which societies are backward and they're less educated, less healthy, less wealthy, and so on and so forth, and look at them. Unfortunately, there are people that discriminate against women. So what happens? There are consequences of violating the Holy Spirit. not only has social implication, it has material implication, because you discarded half of the population that could invent. You discarded them.
A thoughtful person would look and wonder why. Why is it that the Jewish civilization emerged out of nothing, out of slavery, literally, out of slavery in Egypt? Why would the Christian civilization come from a carpenter? Why would the Islamic civilization come from the middle of the desert where there's nothing there? It is a tremendous force that comes with the revelation of God that starts civilizations. So, in the Baha'i civilization, which we are building now, the whole civilization is global. Therefore, all of these inventions are global. When he talks about sea travel, this is really the very first one. Then, in 1903, the first people fly up. Why did they start to fly in 1903 and not 1650 and not 1540? Why not? Why then? And then 60 years later, they're in a space capsule going to the moon. After a million years of not flying, in only 60 years, they go off the beach in North Carolina, and then 60 years later they go to the moon. And they turn around and they take a picture of the Earth to show that the Earth is one thing. I am convinced that all of this is so that the civilization that is envisioned by God for this day will happen. Everything is heading toward globalization. And this is the movement of the future. And so a thoughtful person will say, why now? Why not in the year 1100? Why not in the year 2800? Why now? And thoughtful people put this together. And there are many books written about this, and there are many doctoral theses written about this. But what can be said basically is that the very first thing that united mankind on May 23rd, 1844 was the telegraph. At the time that the Bab is telling Mullah Hussein of his mission, Samuel Morse is tapping out the telegraph. Exactly the same one, really. This is why. So when Gilbert says this is a force of civilization. It's the beginning of a new civilization being born. And now we're reading about the details of it.
Right.
Just another thing, when as just an allegory with man, when you're born, it's not like you're born and you're 21 all of a sudden. It's a gradual process. Mm-hmm. So the only reason we are ready for globalization right now is because we are mature. We're ready for it now.
Well, it's spiritual growth and material growth. But the whole key of this paragraph is the instructions that comes first. And we can compare people or societies that applied it versus people that didn't. Baha'u'llah sent letters to all the big, basically, kings and rulers of the time, and actually warned them that what's going to happen if you don't accept the doctrine that I'm bringing to you regarding unity of mankind. And if you don't... Sorry?
Who sent this?
Baha'u'llah. No, this is letters to the kings. So they are there, and you can mention. And the consequences of those are basically prophesied as well. So this issue of, and Abdul Baha mentions that knowledge of an event that occurs in the future does not make it happen. And this is very important scientific. I know tomorrow sun would come basically from the east, would arise from the east. It doesn't mean I made it happen. Yes.
This prayer, in one sense, shows this paragraph does show the power of prayer to affect change in the world, especially when the prayer comes from the pure heart of His Holiness the Bab. But you can look at it another way too, in that it wasn't like the Bab said, "Wow, this is a terrible journey. We need to do something about this. Mankind needs to have more knowledge. God, please help us." Rather, this is the vehicle. Because God chose at that time to infuse into the world these fresh capacities to comprehend scientific truth that had previously been hidden by the will of God as well. And He chose that moment as the vehicle where we can see physically this is where it happened. So prayer does have a very powerful effect, and we have to purify our prayers for it to work, because Baha'u'llah also prayed for the unity of mankind. We're still waiting for that one to happen. But this is one prayer that, how things appear and how they look are always for our benefit, so that we can clearly point to an incident and say, well, this is where we became smarter by the will of God.
But remember, this doctrine regarding the spiritual dimension being with us now, this was the whole concept of Shaykhi doctrine. And we read a paragraph that was mentioning why, for example, Shaykhis were praying at the foot of the Imam Hussein's mausoleum, not his head, because he believed that his spirit is with them there.
Basically, that was my point, that do we get help through spiritual prayers?
That's correct. Inspiration.
Okay, you say we get inspiration.
That's right. And help, of course. But this is the whole point, where the force of prayer or need, a spiritual need, which may translate into a physical outcome, creates that force. So it's all linked together. And if you link them together, the force becomes stronger and stronger. And this is really the whole premise, and this is outside our current subject. But the whole point of it is that how does the civilization grows, how the infusion of this energy comes from outside our system, and what implication it does in terms of progressing the civilization, which comes through discovery.
In a simpler way, just beside the religion or all these things, all these prayers I read, they are beautiful words, beautiful things. It just change your, just reading it.
Exactly. That's exactly. If you read the book,
because it doesn't say anything to upset you or to give you
a bad inspiration. Just
so
good inspiration.
No, the source of it, the source. Let me explain. The source of it is actually religion is for this, because as I was mentioning before, our brains are an subjective device. So there should be an objective methodology to bring us close to reality. Religion is just that. It tells you, because you can't detect reality. The only way you can detect it when you have an objective methodology, a blueprint that is true. And then you align yourself. So you have to continuously align. The prayers are one tool. You see?
I see, but Hussein says that, it's, I don't think...
No, it's preparing yourself to accept the reality. It says, God, forgive us for the sins that we do.
So when we're praying to God that get us across this mess...
no, he didn't say get us across this mess. Well, he said, right, he said, bring about those inspiration for humanity, so humanity would get saved from the perils of the ocean travel. That's what he did.
There's power in
right.
prayer. Otherwise, why pray?
Yeah.
So, for example, if the sun is out there, maybe prayer is like the magnifying glass that's put to the power of the light, which focuses it and makes it stronger.
I agree with Gilbert that prayers do not change the facts in physical, the laws of physics. I mean, you can't pray that suddenly this chair go upward. I mean, you can pray and pray, but I don't think it's going to happen.
That's right.
It's against the nature of physics.
But it's not designed to do that either. Yeah. Okay, let's read on.
Upon his arrival in Jadi, the Bab donned the pilgrim's garb, mounted a camel, and set out on his journey to Mecca. Qudus, however, notwithstanding the repeatedly expressed desire of his master, preferred to accompany him on foot all the way from Jadi to that holy city. Holding in his hand the bridle of the camel upon which the Bab was riding, he walked along joyously and prayerfully, ministering to his master's needs, wholly indifferent to the fatigues of his arduous march. Every night, from eventide until daybreak, Qudus, sacrificing comfort and sleep, would continue with unrelaxing vigilance to watch beside his beloved, ready to provide for his wants and to ensure the means of his protection and safety. One day, when the Bab had dismounted close to a well in order to offer his morning prayer, a roving Bedouin suddenly appeared on the horizon, drew near to him, and, snatching the saddlebag that had been lying on the ground beside him, and which contained his writings and papers, vanished into the unknown desert. His Ethiopian servant set out to pursue him, but was prevented by his master, who, as he was praying, motioned to him with his hand to give up his pursuit. "Had I allowed you," the Bab later on affectionately assured him, "you would surely have overtaken and punished him. But this was not to be. The papers and writings which that bag contained are destined to reach, through the instrumentality of this Arab, such places as we could never have succeeded in attaining. Grieve not therefore at his action, for this was decreed by God, the Ordainer, the Almighty." Many a time afterwards did the Bab, on similar occasions, seek to comfort his friends by such reflections. By words such as these, he turned the bitterness of regret and of resentment into radiant acquiescence in the divine purpose and into joyous submission to God's will. On the day of Arafat, which is the day preceding the festival, the Bab, seeking the quiet seclusion of his cell, devoted his whole time to meditation and worship. On the following day, the day after Nar, after he had offered the feast day prayer, he proceeded to Muna, where, according to ancient custom, he purchased 19 lambs of the choicest breed, of which he sacrificed 9 in his own name, 7 in the name of Qudus, and 3 in the name of his Ethiopian servant. He refused to partake of the meat of this consecrated sacrifice, preferring instead to distribute it freely among the poor and needy of that neighborhood. Although the month of Zil-Hijji, December AD 1844, the month of pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, coincided in that year with the first month of the winter season. Yet so intense was the heat in that region that the pilgrims who made the circuit of the sacred shrine were unable to perform that rite in their usual garments. Draped in a light, loose-fitting tunic, they joined in the celebration of the festival. The Bab, however, refused, as a mark of deference, to discard either his turban or cloak. Dressed in his usual attire, he, with the utmost dignity and calm, and with extreme simplicity and reverence, compassed the Kaaba and performed all the prescribed rites of worship. On the last day of his pilgrimage to Mecca, the Bab met Mirza Muhit-i-Kirmani. He stood facing the black stone when the Bab approached him, and taking his hand in his, addressed him in these words: "O Muhit, you regard yourself as one of the most outstanding figures of the Shaykhi community, and a distinguished exponent of its teaching. In your heart, you even claim to be one of the direct successors and rightful inheritors of those twin great lights, those stars that have heralded the morn of divine guidance. Behold, we are both now standing within this most sacred shrine. Within its hallowed precincts, he whose spirit dwells in this place can cause truth immediately to be known and distinguished from falsehood and righteousness from error. Verily I declare, none besides me in this day, whether in the east or in the west, can claim to be the gate that leads men to the knowledge of God. My proof is none other than that proof whereby the truth of the Prophet Muhammad was established. Ask me whatsoever you please. Now, at this very moment, I pledge myself to reveal such verses as can demonstrate the truth of my mission. You must choose either to submit yourself unreservedly to my cause, or to repudiate it entirely. You have no other alternative. If you choose to reject my message, I will not let go your hand until you pledge your word to declare publicly your repudiation of the truth which I have proclaimed. Thus shall he who speaks the truth be made known, and he that speaks falsely shall be condemned to eternal misery and shame. Then shall the way of truth be revealed and made manifest to all men." This peremptory challenge, thrust so unexpectedly by the Bab upon Mirza Muhit-i-Kirmani, profoundly distressed him. He was overpowered by its directness, its compelling majesty and force. In the presence of that youth, he, notwithstanding his age, his authority and learning, felt as a helpless bird prisoned in the grasp of a mighty eagle. Confused and full of fear, he replied, "My lord, my master, ever since the day on which my eyes beheld you in Kabila, I seemed at last to have found and recognized him who had been the object of my quest. I renounce whosoever has failed to recognize you, and despise him in whose heart may yet linger the faintest misgivings as to your purity and holiness. I pray you to overlook my weakness and entreat you to answer me in my perplexity. Please God, I may at this very place, within the precincts of this hallowed shrine, swear my fealty to you, and arise for the triumph of your cause. If I be insincere in what I declare, if in my heart I should disbelieve what my lips proclaim, I would deem myself utterly unworthy of the grace of the prophet of God, and regard my action as an act of manifest disloyalty to Ali, his chosen successor." The Bab, who listened attentively to his words, and who was well aware of his helplessness and poverty of soul, answered and said, "Verily I say, the truth is even now known and distinguished from falsehood. O shrine of the Prophet of God, and you, O Qudus, who have believed in me, I take you both in this hour as my witnesses. You have seen and heard that which has come to pass between me and him. I call upon you to testify thereunto, and God verily is, beyond and above you, my sure and ultimate witness. He is the all-seeing, the all-knowing, the all-wise. O Muhit, set forth whatsoever perplexes your mind, and I will, by the aid of God, unloose my tongue and undertake to resolve your problems, so that you may testify to the excellence of my utterance, and realize that no one besides me is able to manifest my wisdom." Mirza Muhit responded to the invitation of the Bab and submitted to him his questions. Pleading the necessity of his immediate departure for Medina, he expressed the hope of receiving, ere his departure from that city, the text of the promised reply. "I will grant your request," the Bab assured him. "On my way to Medina I shall, with the assistance of God, reveal my answer to your questions. If I meet you not in that city, my reply will surely reach you immediately after your arrival in Kabila. Whatever justice and fairness may dictate, the same shall I expect you to fulfill. If ye do well, to your own behoof will ye do well. If ye do evil, against yourselves will ye do it. God is verily independent of all his creatures." Verses from the Quran. Mirza Muhit, ere his departure, again expressed his firm resolve to redeem his solemn pledge. "I shall never depart from Medina," he assured the Bab, "whatever may betide, until I have fulfilled my covenant with you." As the moat which is driven before the gale, he, unable to withstand the sweeping majesty of the revelation proclaimed by the Bab, fled in terror from before his face. He tarried a while in Medina, and, faithless to his pledge, disregardful of the admonitions of his conscience, left for Kabila. The Bab, faithful to his promise, revealed on his way from Mecca to Medina his written reply to the questions that had perplexed the mind of Mirza Muhit, and gave it the name of Sahifi-i Bainul Haramain, which is the epistle between the two shrines. Mirza Muhit, who received it in the early days of his arrival in Kabila, remained unmoved by its tone and refused to recognize the precepts which it inculcated. His attitude towards the faith was one of concealed and persistent opposition. At times he professed to be a follower and supporter of that notorious adversary of the Bab, Haji Mirza Karim Khan, and occasionally claimed for himself the station of an independent leader. Nearing the end of his days, whilst residing in Iraq, he, feigning submission to Baha'u'llah, expressed, through one of the Persian princes who dwelt in Baghdad, a desire to meet him. He requested that his proposed interview be regarded as strictly confidential. "Tell him," was Baha'u'llah's reply, that in the days of my retirement in the mountains of Suleymaniye, I, in a certain ode which I composed, set forth the essential requirements from every wayfarer who treads the path of search in his quest of truth. Share with him this verse from that ode. If thine aim be to cherish thy life, approach not our court. But if sacrifice be thy heart's desire, come and let others come with thee, for such is the way of faith, if in thy heart thou seekest reunion with Baha. Shouldst thou refuse to tread this path, why trouble us? Be gone. If he is willing, he will openly and unreservedly hasten to meet me. If not, I refuse to see him. Baha'u'llah's unequivocal answer disconcerted Mirza Muhit. Unable to resist and unwilling to comply, he departed for his home in Karbala the very day he received that message. As soon as he arrived, he sickened, and 3 days later, he died. No sooner had the Bab performed the last of the observances in connection with his pilgrimage to Mecca than he addressed an epistle to the sheriff of that holy city, wherein he set forth in clear and unmistakable terms the distinguishing features of his mission and called upon him to arise and embrace his cause. This epistle, together with selections from his other writings, he delivered to Qudus and instructed him to present them to the sheriff. The latter, however, too absorbed in his own material pursuits to incline his ear to the words which had been addressed to him by the Bab, failed to respond to the call of the divine message. Haji Neyaz-i Baghdadi has been heard to relate the following. In the year AH 1267, AD 1850 to 51, I undertook a pilgrimage to that holy city, where I was privileged to meet the sheriff. In the course of his conversation with me, he said, I recollect that in the year 1260, during the season of pilgrimage, a youth came to visit me. He presented to me a sealed book, which I readily accepted, but was too much occupied at the time to read. A few days later I met again that same youth, who asked me whether I had any reply to make to his offer. Pressure of work had again detained me from considering the contents of that book. I was therefore unable to give him a satisfactory reply. When the season of pilgrimage was over, one day, as I was sorting out my papers and letters, my eyes fell accidentally upon that book. I opened it and found in its introductory pages a moving and exquisitely written homily, which was followed by verses, the tone and language of which bore a striking resemblance to the Koran. All that I gathered from the perusal of the book was that among the people of Persia, a man of the seed of Fatimah and descendant of the family of Hashim had raised a new call, and was announcing to all peoples the appearance of the promised Qaim. I remained, however, ignorant of the name of the author of that book, nor was I informed of the circumstances attending that call. A great commotion, I remarked, has indeed seized that land during the last few years. A youth, a descendant of the Prophet and a merchant by profession, has claimed that his utterance was the voice of divine inspiration. He has publicly asserted that, within the space of a few days, there could stream from his tongue verses of such number and excellence as would surpass in volume and beauty the Koran itself, a work which it took Muhammad no less than 23 years to reveal. A multitude of people, both high and low, civil and ecclesiastical, among the inhabitants of Persia, have rallied round his standard, and have willingly sacrificed themselves in his path. That youth has, during the past year, in the last days of the month of Shaban, July AD 1850, suffered martyrdom in Tabriz, in the province of Azerbaijan. They who persecuted him sought by this means to extinguish the light which he kindled in that land. Since his martyrdom, however, his influence has pervaded all classes of people. The sheriff, who was listening attentively, expressed his indignation at the behavior of those who had persecuted the Bab. "The malediction of God be upon these evil people," he exclaimed, "the people who in past days treated in the same manner our holy and illustrious ancestors." With these words the sheriff concluded his conversation with me. From Mecca the Bab proceeded to Medina. It was the first day of the month of Muharram, in the year AH 1261, Friday the 10th of January, AD 1845, when he found himself on the way to that holy city. As he approached it, he called to mind the stirring events that had immortalized the name of him who had lived and died within its walls. Those scenes which bore eloquent testimony to the creative power of that immortal genius seemed to be reenacted with undiminished splendor before his eyes. He prayed as he drew nigh unto that holy sepulchre which enshrined the mortal remains of the prophet of God. He also remembered, as he trod that holy ground, that shining herald of his own dispensation. He knew that in the cemetery of Bab'i, in a place not far distant from the shrine of Muhammad, there had been laid to rest Sheikh Ahmad-i-Asai, the harbinger of his own revelation, who, after a life of onerous service, had decided to spend the evening of his days within the precincts of that hallowed shrine. There came to him also the vision of those holy men, those pioneers and martyrs of the faith, who had fallen gloriously on the field of battle, and who, with their lifeblood, had sealed the triumph of the cause of God. Their sacred dust seemed as if reanimated by the gentle tread of his feet. Their shades seemed to have been stirred by the reviving breath of his presence. They looked to him as if they had arisen at his approach, were hastening towards him, and were voicing their welcome. They seemed to be addressing to him this fervent plea: "Repair not unto thy native land, we beseech thee, O thou beloved of our hearts. Abide thou in our midst, for here, far from the tumult of thine enemies who are lying in wait for thee, thou shalt be safe and secure. We are fearful for thee. We dread the plottings and machinations of thy foes. We tremble at the thought that their deeds might bring eternal damnation to their souls." "Fear not," the Barb's indomitable spirit replied. "I am come into this world to bear witness to the glory of sacrifice. You are aware of the intensity of my longing. You realize the degree of my renunciation. Nay, beseech the Lord your God to hasten the hour of my martyrdom, and to accept my sacrifice. Rejoice, for both I and Qudus will be slain on the altar of our devotion to the King of Glory. The blood which we are destined to shed in his path will water and revive the garden of our immortal felicity. The drops of this consecrated blood will be the seed out of which will arise the mighty tree of God, the tree that will gather beneath its all-embracing shadow the peoples and kindreds of the earth. Grieve not, therefore, if I depart from this land, for I am hastening to fulfill my destiny."
Great. So here, this is very interesting. There's a custom even today that people that go for the pilgrimage to Mecca go and visit afterward the tomb of Muhammad. Now, of course, we know that Islamic scholars believe that the spirit of Muhammad rose to heavens through Dome of the Rock, that mosque that is in basically Palestine, right? Right. This is the mosque that is built on top of the Wailing Wall. On top of the old temple, right. 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 So the key really here, and the reference to Sheikh Ahmad apparently was buried in that vicinity as well, which was the revealer of a true translator of Quranic prophecies. So this is really the dispensation and the tour that he did to fulfill that prophecy. And of course, then later on, he said, look, instead of him being with his disciples where he would be safe, he really traveled, and he actually prophesied his own martyrdom because of he had to fulfill the object of his destiny. Right. What do we get from these two paragraphs we read? Any comments?
Very little references is made to the reaction of the government to these kind of activities that these people people had, and suddenly, they are executed or martyred. But it doesn't really explain that who turned them in, how did the government find out about that?
Yeah, we're going to read on, but the whole question here really is that the references here said to the basically eternity of the spirit itself and how short their endeavors are going to be in this world, but the main fruit of their endeavor would be realized in the other world. So the whole concept from point of view of why manifestations would really forego their safety, their basically well-being, for what reason they would do this. Because there is no material benefit to them at all. So these are really the sources of, and people that follow them as well, in terms of obviously losing everything they have and walking into an environment where they know what the outcome is going to be. So if it wasn't for the truth, they would never do such a thing. People don't do things to just prove that they're right. So the consequences of their actions relates to the validity of the message that they're bringing in general.
So this hierarchy that we have on this earth will continue in the afterlife, and there are different stages that you can obtain or gain.
Well, what do you mean by hierarchy?
They sacrifice their lives here.
No, of course.
Their life in the other world.
That's correct.
Somebody else may say, I'm going to shut my mouth and not talk about it and just live my life.
That's correct.
So you won't be as credited as this whole.
No, of course. The whole point is the level of refinement of your spirit. And as Abdul Baha mentions, as you develop arms and eyes and ears and legs and hands in the womb of a mother, which you have no use for it in that environment, when you come to this world, you'll see that where the use of those properties are. And similarly, we have in the spiritual world, which we Baha'is believe that we're a spiritual being that has a physical body, and we shed this cage, and the basically cage is broken, your spirit becomes free for eternity. And this experiment or laboratory that we are here refines your spirit to achieve its ability to fully function in the other world. So these are really degrees of detachment. Remember all the basically elements, and ironically is linked to the names of God generally, where benevolence, sacrifice, you have love, you have forgiveness, and all these elements that we attribute to aspects of God is the perfection that humanity needs to follow, because the potentiality or exists in humanity to achieve it. So each human has the potential, but the willingness to get to that point is in our own hand. So recognizing that, and of course the day of resurrection and these tests that they were talking about in Muslim doctrine, it's this: when you're faced with reality, do you accept it? And what are you willing, and there are consequences of accepting the truth and applying it, not just And there, again, definition of religion has changed in the Western culture, of course, improperly, in terms of if you could, for example, believe in Jesus, you just get saved. In the Baha'i religion, is the practice of the religion that saves you and elevates your spirit to the stages that you were talking about, as far as closeness to God in general. But there is no material hell, there is no material heaven. And interestingly, we remember our friends and loved ones in the other world and people that we associated with. So this is really reference to that as well. So the experiences, material experiences or spiritual experiences that you have in this world, you will remember and retain in the other world. So it's not going to disappear.
You say there is, of course, there is no material hell or material heaven, but how does the Baha'i faith look at those who choose to go exactly the opposite of the laws of God?
Sure.
What will happen?
Well, this is the whole problem. If you cut your finger, no, the sting is very little, right? It's very little. Now, imagine you did something bad and you know you did something bad. The effect of that thing would stay with you for life. One is physical harm, pain, which goes away in a matter of minutes. The other one is almost permanent. And every time you remember or visual stimuli to your brain brings that to your mind, you would feel bad. So which one is worse? Material fire that you would burn, or something that continuously keeps you in pain. And this is really the contrast and the tools that you need to operate in the other world. What would happen if someone comes to this world blind? They would miss most of the anomalies and beauty of this world. This is the same way. If you go to the other world without ears and eyes and deaf and mute, what would happen? What you suffer from would be enormously larger than the physical hell that other people would.
If we still take the other religion as a reference, because that's what we do always, it's very difficult to understand. The moment you cut all these things and you start to understand what is in this religion, then it becomes logical. Because
that's the whole point.
Comparing is always, you cannot be.
But remember, those religions at the time that they were revealed, where people could not comprehend these ideas and their spirit or absorb it. It didn't make sense to them. Now imagine during Muhammad's time you say, now I have a device, I'm going to call Australia and someone who's my family and directly talk to him. So they thought you were crazy, basically. That wouldn't be possible at the time. So it's the similar issues related to ability to comprehend that there is possibility. And Baha'u'llah even mentions the things that you see manifestations do that is completely out of ordinary. Miracles that you assign to manifestation, in the future ordinary people would do. That's exactly his words.
Yeah, I do remember that in Islamic explanation of hell, it was basically a place where the sinners would be set on fire. And literally it says that with firewood. And as a child I was thinking that, where are they going to get all this firewood?
But
the trees in the world.
No, it's the turmoil, the torment that they're going to put them on. So there is devil and is going to enslave them and make them work and so on and starve them and so on and so forth. So these are imagery illusions that they made so people at the time could understand.
Allah calls it the fire of remoteness. The fire of remoteness from God. The fire of being blind when everyone around you is seeing beautiful things. The fire of being deaf when everyone else can't hear. This is the kind of torment that you have, but it's not literal fire.
But reality is very important, and this really goes back to the Holy Spirit. When something is revealed, whether it's scientifically to basically inspirations or basically true manifestations, when it's revealed and it's the truth, people would adopt and accept them. And guess what? A few weeks ago, Pope mentioned that the existence of material hell is not relevant to Christianity because God is pure love and cannot have hell. Guess what happened? They're adopting the Holy Spirit anyways. Why? Because they have no choice. Once reality is revealed, what they do, they adjust themselves to exist and keep their man-made structure intact. Otherwise, and as you see, I mean, the whole Europe now has no religion whatsoever. It's completely died. Yes?
Scientific definition, what exactly is fire? I mean, is it physical? Is it liquid? Is it air?
Energy.
What is it?
Well, I think in the explanation of Baha'u'llah in the writing, he says, hell, when you are far from the purpose or the will of God, and heaven, when you are submit to the will of God. In other words, you do the things for humanity to please other mankind. And the best, the best prayers in the world, he says, when you service mankind. So I think if you put all those things in consideration, when we do the things that it is not the will of God, then that's hell, in my opinion.
But the key is the knowledge of doing something wrong and the remorse that comes with it. That's the most painful thing that you can carry, even in this world.
I think
the knowledge of you did something wrong and blaming yourself, why did you do this?
And the lack of courage to undo it sometimes, to publicly undo it sometimes.
I think the greatest influence in the way people understand heaven and hell has been done by Christianity, because when you go to the prior religion, there's basically no such description, and when you come to Islam, there is no such description, even though in the doctrine of Christianity there wasn't such descriptions of hell and heaven and the Satan and demons and stuff.
No, they have those. This is, remember, the Old Testament. Christianity is not just the New Testament, it's the Old Testament as well. So the Abrahamic religion, which is the basis of from Adam to Muhammad and Bab and Baha'u'llah, these stories, of course, it was allegorical and people translated as a material or physical stories. But these laws of good and bad exist. Even in, for example, Zoroastrian doctrine, you have this concept of heaven and hell. It's been around.
Portrayed in the way Christianity portrays it, because in Christian churches throughout Africa, particularly in Sudan and Ethiopia, you have these drawings, these elaborate drawings that all the angels and the people of God are in white skin and white, and all the demons, they have the black skin, they have horns and tails and stuff. I don't think any other religion had put such description into these entities, whether they're true or not, as Christianity, because
they exist in Islam too.
But they copied from Christianity.
No, of course. But remember, Islam borrowed a lot from Old Testament. So this doctrine, but this issue of good and bad and trying to create a contrast has been always there.
And so much of it has to do with the maturity of the human race at that moment that these stories were told.
From a historical perspective, I think another reason why imagery is so prevalent and so strong in Christianity is because the history of the way early civilizations embraced the Bible one thing that's unique about the Quran in Islam is when the Quran was first revealed by Muhammad, it wasn't actually written down. The Bedouin tribes and the history of the people living in Saudi Arabia had this very unique poetic way of using verse to describe things and to record history and writings and teachings and ideas. So when the Quran was first being revealed, it was revealed, it was memorized, it was spoken, it was verse, it was like poetry. Whereas when you go back to the time of the early Christians in the Bible, lots of things were written down, but a lot of the people who were trying to learn about Christianity or the Bible in general, they couldn't read. So to a group of people that can't read, imagery, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Having very distinct, very clear imagery can be a lot better for them to understand these concepts because they can't read it themselves, and there isn't that long-standing cultural tradition of spoken verse. And then I think one of the reasons why fire is so prevalent in this idea and imagery of the afterlife and hell is because when you read like prayers and the writings in the Baha'i faith, this idea of remoteness and disconnection from God, it's described as just like this awful, horrible, lingering torment. It's not something quick and easy. It's just, it lingers with you. It stays with you. It's hard to ignore. And the idea of fire and, when you burn yourself, it's not something that's over very quickly. Like if you get a burn on your hand or you burn your finger, that pain, that throbbing, it lingers and it stays there for a long time. So I think the idea of fire and how it injures you, it's a very
allegorical.
Yeah, good allegory, good way to sort of understand, what that longing, that lingering, that throbbing feeling of remoteness to God.
But then the Christians had something that the Muslims did not have, which was 1,000 years of fantastic artwork.
That too.
And the artwork literally is an image of people. And so the devils and the demons, these are always very interesting things for artworks. And in every church, you've got artwork of Jesus, but you've also got some scary stuff in every church. And so the image was really for a much earlier time. And hopefully we've graduated beyond the literal understanding of this kind of thing.
My last question for the day, in Baha'i faith, is there redemption in the afterlife?
Of course, there is no redemption, there is no place that you don't. You see, this is the whole point. This concept of absolute doesn't exist in terms of you arrive in heaven and you're done. But who wants to drink milk
if the fire is hot, you're well done.
Right. So this question of that I'm getting there and I don't do anything. There is no such a thing. So the question is, ironically, they're saying this during prayers, and you're praying for people that are in Baha'i doctrine. Even you can pray for people that passed on, that didn't believe, and it would augment their station in terms of. Remember, it's a huge concept regarding forgiveness, right? Forgiveness, which everybody is forgiven, doesn't mean that you once you're forgiven, everything that you did is erased and you're starting from scratch.
Listen, Kambiz has a book for you from the bookstore.
Right.
We'll explain this for you.
Right. Okay.